In a recent sit-down with MSNBC's Rachel Maddow, former White House aide and assistant to former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows during the Trump administration, Cassidy Hutchinson, called on Republicans to take an immediate stand against Donald Trump.
I do not believe that Mr. Trump is a strong Republican, but in this next election cycle, in my opinion, it's the make or break moment for the Republican Party. Now is the time. If these politicians, these men and some women that are currently in Congress want to make the break and want to take the stand, they have to do it now. We can't wait any longer for them to do it. I don't know why they're so willing to support him. I think it's extremely disappointing, and it is not a hard issue to take. We're talking about a man who, at the very essence of his being, almost destroyed democracy in one day, and he wants to do it again. He wants to run for president to do it again. He's been indicted 4 times since January 6th. I would not have a clear conscience and be able to sleep at night if I were a Republican in Congress that supported Donald Trump.
Hutchinson also responded to Mark Meadows' comments on her new book, in which she paints a picture of her experience in the Trump White House.
Not sort of just vaguely casting aspersions at you, it's most of the statement, but then saying much of her claims in this book about Mr. Meadows or otherwise are filled with half-truths, falsehoods, and purposefully omitting context to sell books.
I would encourage him to go testify under oath if he thinks that what is in the book and what I have testified to under oath, which is consistent with what is in the book, he can go testify under oath if he has strong feelings about that.
Were you disappointed that the Justice Department elected not to prosecute him for contempt of Congress when he ignored the congressional subpoena that you responded to from the January 6th investigation?
I'll leave it to Mr. Meadows and his team to respond to that. What I will say is I hope that Mark is now doing the right thing. What I define as the right thing, which is coming forth and honoring your oath that you swore to protect your country.
Former President Trump posted a scathing criticism of the media on Truth Social this weekend, writing, quote, "They are almost all dishonest and corrupt, but Comcast, with its one-sided and vicious coverage by NBC News, and in particular MSNBC, often incorrectly referred to as MSNBC Democrat National Committee, should be investigated for its country-threatening treason." Later in that post, he wrote, "They are a true threat to democracy and are, in fact, the enemy of the people." You know, this is the stuff that people don't like about Donald Trump, Bree.
This stuff?
It's this stuff. It's like, man, you're leading for a major party in the country. You have an opportunity to talk about the economy, talk about immigration, talk about this proxy war with Russia, talk about China's aggression militarily and economically across the globe, including our own hemisphere. But instead, he's on Truth Social. Again, I said this earlier, still stuck on the 2020 election. Move on. People don't care about that anymore.
Well, I mean, some portion of the public obviously does care about it. They have been listening to him for, 3 years now, saying that the election was stolen.
This doesn't win elections, Bree.
And not only that, I mean, I do think a part of why he has a passionate fan base is because he has been successfully able to orient himself as the victim of a broad government conspiracy and a weaponized Department of Justice to indict him 4 times, to impeach him twice. And there is a multi-billion-dollar news industry, half of which profits from relishing his failures, rightly or wrongly, like that, all of that is true. So, many people are invested and feel very defensive of him. I remember there was this discussion when he first announced as to whether or not his campaign had the energy that it once did. Yeah. And then very soon after his announcement and all of the prognosticators saying, he lost his riz, then the first documents case happened, the raid on Mar-a-Lago happened, and it seemed like everybody was back to defending Trump. Mm-hmm. And I do think that he gets something out of it.
No, I don't, Bree, I don't disagree with anything you said in terms of many folks in the media not being fans of Trump. I don't disagree with how that is interpreted and viewed by many of his supporters and even many Republicans who are somewhat critical of him. I don't disagree in how beneficial these countless indictments have been. I've argued for a while now that I think indictment fatigue has set in, which is why I think you've seen the numbers shift so much in his favor despite everything. But my point is, you cannot win a federal election for the presidency by winning 8 battleground states with Republican voters alone. Elections, I've worked on 3 presidential campaigns. It has always been about addition and not subtraction. And my point simply as a strategist that's helped elect a whole lot of Republicans across the country, we need to figure out what it's going to take to turn out some of those voters who decided not to vote for Donald Trump in 2020. And I don't think talking about the past helps. I think talking about things where Trump was successful, such as economics, is where he does better with some of those particular voters.
So given that there are these ongoing indictments, specifically the Georgia indictment, and people like Cassidy Hutchinson talking to the public about her experience in the Trump White House, on some level it does seem unavoidable for him not to respond in some ways to the accusations that are being made. So, I am not as much in this world. What is your sense of Cassidy Hutchinson, her choice now to talk to MSNBC? I do know that so many conservatives have over and over again, when people have spoken against Donald Trump in any context, just thrown the whole baby out with the bathwater, because they say at this point, if you go against Trump, even if you do it on Fox News, no matter where you do it, it basically means that you're not worth talking to anymore. No matter how many Republicans defect, it's never enough to change minds.
And I don't necessarily agree with that merely because someone criticizes Donald Trump. I mean, people should be able to be critical of anybody in the Republican Party. I mean, it's ridiculous to me that everybody has to believe, like groupthink. That's crazy. That's something that conservatives purport, at least traditionally, to not be about, to not believe in. We're supposed to be all about individualism and allowing individuals in our camp to form their own ideals. And so I think you should be able to be critical of someone and still maintain your conservative gravitas. But I will say this in terms of Ms. Hutchinson. I believe what she's probably saying is true because she testified under oath. So I'm going to believe that she is telling the truth based upon that. Otherwise, there are some legal things that she would have to face if not. With that said, though, Bree, I don't think it's unfair for people to, at a minimum, question, why now? If these things are really bad, they're really terrible, why did you stay? Why not quit and raise the alarms? Now, even if you were afraid to say anything publicly, why not quit and then anonymously say something? I mean, I'll think about Miles Taylor, who wrote the book. I think it was titled Anonymous. He was within the administration, wrote the book. He was talking with various journalists, telling them what was going on. Now, he didn't publicly come out until way after the fact because he was afraid of retribution because he was still within his position. But at least he had enough courage to go that far. She stayed. I was reading an article from, I think, a couple years ago. She was campaigning with Trump in September of 2020. There was a picture of her and Kayleigh McEnany dancing a YMCA, the song. And so it's like these things are so terrible, yet you were acting as if everything was okay. And then after the fact, after the house is nearly burned to the ground, you come out and say, oh, wait a minute, guys, let me tell you how bad it was. Now, again, I'm not saying that she shouldn't get some type of credit for telling the truth from what she saw. I just ask, why now? And people say, well, she was young. She was young. I also worked for Trump. I was 26 years old. Cassidy is only like a year or two younger than I am. That didn't stop me from being critical about the things that I disliked about the former president. I said, look, I am a conservative, but there are also some things in terms of his behavior that I will not stand for. And whether you like it or not, that's your opinion. She could have done those things, and she chose not to. So to me, I respect her for what she's doing now, but I'm not certain if I'm willing to applaud her as some type of hero.
Well,
I
don't know that one needs to think that she's a hero.
But many are calling her that.
Well, you're free to disagree with those people. I'm not.
Yeah.
And my question is whether or not she's saying truthful things that are relevant to the indictment
I don't think it's going to
that her
matter in terms
boss
of the election.
is implicated in.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to matter in terms of the election.
Well, let's not just jump to the election because there's an issue of legal culpability, ethical culpability
Those are two
on the
different
table
things.
here. Right, and I'm considering both of them. So I want to talk about legal culpability and ethical culpability. That's both of which Cassidy Hutchinson is speaking to right now. And I suspect that I don't remember if she's been asked why now. She probably has. But the nature of her critiques have been about what happened on 1/6. So it is very plausible. I obviously disagree with working for Donald Trump at any point, ethically, morally. But I can also appreciate that it's a rational position to share his policies, to like him, to want to work for him, but for a line to be drawn at trying to steal an election. And I think that that's what many of the people who've come forward have spoken to, that as much as they might have disagreed here or there with the policy, the thing that have caused them to break ranks is ultimately that the actions leading up to 1/6 and 1/6
So some
itself
illegal stuff is okay and not the really terrible illegal stuff.
Well, what illegal stuff?
I mean, because in her book, she doesn't just talk about January 6th. I mean, I've read some excerpts. She talks about a lot of different things she saw even before January 6th.
What other kinds of things?
I mean, Mark Meadows. I mean, there are other things that with Trump's behavior when they were traveling in different places. I don't remember all the specifics.
I mean, illegal like trying to steal an election illegal?
No, that's
or
not what I'm
just
saying. What I'm saying, Bree, is there were certain behaviors that she witnessed that supersede January 6th. Other things before that, that
I'm
terrible
curious
moment.
about what kinds
and I'm
of
saying,
things.
why wait until just then?
Well, see, I don't know the nature of these things. You're just saying things, but they're likely not as serious as stealing an election.
No, and that's why I just said some things are okay, but the really terrible things, okay, I got to say something now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that that's crazy. I think we live in Washington, and most people don't. Frankly, like they take jobs in politics not because they love the principle.
I'm not going to work for someone who's committing even soft illegal crimes. Like I'm not doing that. I would quit.
And they tether themselves to successful campaigns. And Donald Trump was the president of the United States of America, and they need jobs. So do I think that that's moral? No, that's why I took a job with the Bernie Sanders campaign, because I passionately believe in 99.9% of what he believes in. But I don't consider myself this person who works in politics and never want to work for another campaign again. But I'm also not going to be naive about the world that we live in. And there are many people who need jobs, she's born in 1996.
She was uniquely, I mean, look, it's one thing to say, I'm taking this job because I have a unique set of skills and I'm going to a certain department because I believe with my skill set, I can sort of help usher, a new era within this particular department. That's one thing. She was uniquely unqualified for the position that she had. So, I mean, I'm not necessarily certain why she would have presumed that taking this, I don't know.
That's even more of a reason to want to hold on to your job if you're not very experienced and can't get a new one.
Maybe I'm being too critical of her. I applaud her.
Well, I don't know why we're talking about
now,
her. We should be talking about her testimony, whether it's accurate, whether or not it is going to lead to Trump going to jail.
Yeah, but all of her interviews are about her book and about Rudy Giuliani.
What's her book about?
Mark Meadows burning papers and smelling like a bonfire.
A co-conspirator in the alleged crime of Donald Trump conspiring to steal an election. So that's, I mean, you can say what you want about her, but that ultimately feels like a lot of pomp and circumstance and distraction from her saying some inconvenient things to Donald Trump right now. And that's why he's going off on Truth Social.
I'm not going to let you get away with that. I don't think from my position it's inconvenience. My point is,
it's not about from your position. I literally referenced Donald Trump.
But why wait until now? There were other people who said things immediately after. Many other people. I referenced Miles Taylor as a great example. Immediately, Miles took action.
Didn't bother her.
Why? Well, that's my point. They didn't bother her. She was okay with it.
I get your point, and I'm saying that like you aren't the same person. You don't get to decide what Cassidy Hutchinson's upset with.
Well, but I can get to decide about her character, though,
Shermichael,
based on her actions.
I can sit here and say it was unconscionable for you to have ever worked for Donald Trump.
You
so
can say that.
What standing do you have? But I'm not interested in saying that. My job is not to weigh in on people's morals. You're asking if she can be credible because she only came forward when she did. I'm saying obviously, because obviously her line isn't my line, your line isn't my line. I'm not here to assess people's lines.
Obviously what?
Obviously, it can be the case that someone's tipping point is the very serious issue of stealing an election. And that to me seems like a very legitimate reason to come forward.
I am making the point that if such an individual can bypass a whole host of other things, then I, at a minimum, am able to question one's moral and ethical boundaries. At a minimum.
But not
at a minimum.
But not Donald Trump's enough to decline to vote to work for him.
But I didn't say that, though, did I? Because what I did say that some individuals can have a certain set of skill sets and then go and work for someone because they believe that they can be an asset, which is why I decided to go to HUD to work for Dr. Carson, to be an asset to HUD, because I believe housing impacts a lot of people. Those are two different things.
And Cassidy Hutchinson had no interest in having employment.
She was uniquely unqualified for the position.
That's a subjective
What do you mean it's
statement
subjective? Are you kidding me?
How's
that subjective?
I could not care less about Cassidy
come on.
Hutchinson's
Come on, that's
hearts
not
and
subjective.
minds. The
That's
question
not
that Donald
subjective.
Trump and everyone's going to have to contend with is whether or not her testimony helps to prove the government to prove its case in
Well,
the
presumably it does, right? I mean, according to some of the interviews, she's met with prosecutors over and over again. But it's not the only issue for the American people, I would argue.
All right. We have to move on. More Rising for you right after this.